Okay, now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this, the camera bodies. It's a complicated topic. There's a lot of technology and a lot of things to discuss, but let's just keep it simple, keep it light. And I kind of want to just share what my experience has been like using these cameras in the field and why I think you would buy one over the other. The notion that you could even make high quality cinematic looking videos with something that's so compact and so small. It was actually a Canon 5D Mark III or Mark IV, and it had a 24-105 kit lens on it, the F4, and I played around with it for a bit and I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the camera. This is how I can achieve that look. And what do I mean by that look? Do you see how this shot looks different than this shot? Or how this shot feels more cinematic than this shot? Now, technically, this effect is called shallow depth of field, or bokeh. And what it does is essentially focus on an item like our own eyes would, and it creates this sort of effect where everything, depending on how far away or how close it is, might be more or less blurry. And that aperture in lenses that are more expensive, what we were talking about earlier, the lower this number, the greater the effect you're gonna have in creating this sort of style or look in the footage. You know, going way back here to like when I was like 10, 11 years old, this is the very first camera that I ever used to make videos. And, you know, used to steal it from my dad or beg him, like, can I borrow this? I want to make some movies, you know, and I took it again. But this is a camera that always pissed me off, mainly because no matter what I did, it would always be in focus. And anything I would film would always be 100% in focus. And that's because this lens is designed so that, like a smartphone, let's say, whatever you're filming, whether you zoom in or not, you're gonna get everything in focus. There's gonna be no shallow depth of field, no bokeh, and it's good for home movies, but it's really bad for cinematic storytelling. When I first picked up that Canon 5D, it completely changed my perception of what was accessible to kind of everyday people, so to speak. Because in my head, to achieve this kind of cinematic look, this beautiful cinematography, I just assumed like, oh, well, probably need like a $50,000 or $100,000 camera. And you know, it's the reason why I don't want to talk about ARRI Alexas or the Red Dragon or any of those really high-end 8K or 16K cameras in this video, because that's an entirely different animal. And my point with this video is to show that for a reasonable budget, you can achieve some really impressive results. And this really harkens back to what got me into, you know, videography and telling stories this way in the first place. So that's why I'm talking about Canon. That's why I'm talking about DSLR and mirrorless cameras. This is where I came in, the Canon 80D, a camera that came out in 2016, and I still think it's a really good camera. The amount of features and how good the image quality is for a camera that really can cap out at full HD or 1080p. I'm still impressed with how resourceful it is in unique situations. Yes, it doesn't compare to modern mirrorless cameras, but I still really like it, and it's an excellent B camera to have on hand. Now, here's the thing. Digital single reflex cameras, or DSLR cameras, basically use a mirror to shoot the image into a sensor, and this was kind of the first iteration of a very compact technology, and it's the same with the Canon 5D. This is where we really start to see a shift in video coming in such a compact form, producing image quality that was very impressive. It wasn't until later that mirrorless cameras saved weight, produced better quality, had some issues, but essentially they'd come to completely replace this older technology. I don't really want to get into what makes mirrorless cameras of today better than DSLR cameras of yesterday. Just know that if you wanted to buy something like this, it only cost you about $1,000. I think even new. You might think, well, why would I even waste my time? The truth is a lot of footage that you're seeing and have seen in previous episodes in WhyBuy were all shot on this camera. Most people wouldn't think that it's very old, but when you understand lighting, when you have the right accessories, again, you can make it cinematic and look very good. This is still a very competent camera, and it's important because it will factor into your purchase decision, I think, once you understand what you're getting extra in the R7 or even the R5. And I just want to circle back just a minute to like choosing Canon. Like, why not Sony? Why not Blackmagic? Why not Nikon? Like, there are other brands that make cameras that are very comparable, almost identical. Like, not to sound like a generalist, but everyone kind of has their pros and cons. I honestly think, depending on what system you buy into initially, because of the lenses, because of the functionality of the camera, it's probably where you're going to stay stuck. Just like buying an Xbox or a PlayStation, you're sort of sucked into this world of, you know, all these accessories and how to use it. But the one thing I'll say, because I have shot on Nikon, I have shot on Panasonic, I have shot on Sony, and I've not shot on Blackmagic, but I've played around with one a little bit. The point is, I really like Canon for a few specific reasons. One, to me, it almost feels like the Apple of the group. Like, you know, like an iPhone or something. It's not the best at any particular thing, but it's really good and user-friendly on a variety of applications, whether it's photography or videography. It's really easy to use. That I very much like. I can't stress the importance of when you're out in the field and a situation is happening and you need to react fast or need to change something quickly. It really feels like these cameras were designed with the user in mind, and in terms of placement, function, you know, all these sort of things. I mean, it's got its flaws, and probably there's some personal bias. But the one thing you'll notice, even if you're a newcomer to the brand, is the build quality of these products from Canon is really high. I think for the money, what you're getting is really, it feels nice. It's very functional. The resolutions in the screen is really good. And even their lenses, the quality of their glass is really good for what it costs to buy it. And that's kind of what's kept me, I think, with Canon is, as I buy more lenses and get more accessories, the price points are fair and the quality is really high. So that's why Canon and not the others, but it's not to say that I wouldn't shoot on any of the others, because they're all outstanding. And again, better in some ways, a lot of ways than Canon is. But anyways, there's another standout feature that I'll talk about why Canon kind of beats the rest. How they record information for color, especially for editing, saves a lot of time, and you get really beautiful images that feel natural, they feel good. And speaking on color really quick, industry standard, most people will film in what's called a log profile, which is kind of geared more towards high dynamic range. So the camera's filming in a flat color profile, which is gray, essentially, picking up a lot of texture and detail, so that after you're applying computing power and editing to apply what are called LUTs, or like pre-set color palettes. And Canon color is not only good for that, but even if you were to just film just with how the camera bakes in the footage, you know, from the get-go, and not apply any color adjustments after, it is really quite impressive what you get. So again, the Apple of all of these products. It's really quite impressive how easy this camera system is to use, all the way from entry-level Canon cameras to the higher-end ones. It's a great feeling product, and it's easy to kind of get going. Now, what I really like about this style of camera bodies, well, for starters, this, I think, is very important, a flip-out monitor, simply because I love field monitors, but I hate the fact that you have to mount them to something, and they're this big, bulky kind of mini TV you got to take with you everywhere. It's got to have separate power. It's got to be mounted on a cage. Typically, it just gets in the way. To have something like a field monitor that's built into the camera and is just already here, Canon has really nice monitors built into their cameras in terms of resolution and giving you a fairly accurate portrayal of what you're filming. So that was a big reason, I think, just form and function, why I like these style of cameras. Okay, so why the Canon R7 versus the R5? Why not the R8? Or why not the R6 or R6 Mark II? Here's the thing. I wanted to focus on two cameras that could achieve very good results, were sort of leaders in the industry in their class, but had a very big price gap difference. Because when you look at the R7 as an entry-level mirrorless camera, say, it's around 2,000 bucks, and the R5, for example, is around 5,000 bucks. Why would you consider one over the other? And I think it's important because what I mentioned earlier, you think about buying into these ecosystems or getting into this as a hobby or profession. Sometimes you just want to spend all the money and be like, wow, just get it over with, get all the best stuff right off the bat. And this is my point. You might not have to, depending on how you're going to be using this. For starters, the Canon R7, R5 have a lot of similarities. They're both made by Canon. They're both kind of industry leading in their class, and you're getting fantastic image quality from both. They have a lot of the same functionality. I mean, there's different number of wheels and buttons. The R5 has a little bit more because I think it's geared more towards a hybrid photography and videography camera. But I would say form and function wise, they both offer a great solution. The main difference you're going to come up first thing, and why the R7 is cheaper, is because of the sensor size. Now, the R7 has a cropped sensor, APS-C camera, and the R5 is a full frame sensor, or a 35mm equivalent, which is like the industry standard for movies and stuff. It's kind of like the baseline standard for making high quality video storytelling. Here's the thing. You could argue that a larger sensor captures more information, therefore it is a better image quality, and an APS-C sensor isn't ever going to be as good. I have a hard time with that because it's in rare instances that you could even spot that. I did this test. I put both cameras with this bracket, and I shot, again, at the same focal length, same setting, same lighting, both cameras, and it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. I think what really gives it away is the fact that the APS-C is the crop sensor. What ends up happening is you get this punch in that happens on lenses. So like, for example, a 24mm filming on a APS-C camera is more like a 38mm. And the reason that is because the sensor size, because it's smaller, it doesn't actually use the full diameter of the lens and what the image is being captured. It has to kind of zoom in, so to speak. So you get this kind of additional zoom on a lens that it doesn't really matter if you're trying to capture something far away. It's actually a benefit, I think. It's only when you're doing wide angle shots. Like you couldn't get a true 14mm or 24mm, like if you mounted it in a car and you wanted just to try and back out as much as you could. On an APS-C camera, it's always going to be punched in a little bit because of the crop sensor. Okay, this is the 24mm f2.8 on the R5. Now, here it is at 70mm. Okay, now here's the R7, which is a crop sensor on 24mm. And now I'm going to zoom it in to 70mm. Okay, this is the R5 filming at f2.8 70mm. Now we're going to go in to 200. Okay, this is now the R7 filming at 70mm, 200. The best way I would put it is that the APS-C sensor on the R7 paired with the camera body and a good lens, you can achieve very, very good results. But the facts are the facts. The R5 can shoot 45 megapixel images, and the R7 can only shoot 33. 33 megapixels is a lot. A lot of people say that 26 is like the sweet spot for the perfect photograph. Again, it's just, I'm just talking about facts here. And it really, I think it matters more so with the video aspect, because if you're trying to future-proof this camera and have something that could be useful more long-term, the R5 can shoot in 8K. And the R7 can't. So while all of our TVs and broadcast materials, 4K becoming a standard, what happens when it's 8K and you have to upgrade and all that stuff? I suppose that's the best defense, but either way, as an 8K camera, it's like barely there. I don't know if I'd have it at a steady 8K camera, but it can. So I don't know. It goes to the R5 so far. So let's move on. So another area that I think is going to really matter, especially shooting out in the field, is frame rates, or available frame rates that the camera can handle. Now, when you think about slow motion, all that is taking something at a very high frame rate and slowing it down to 24 frames a second equivalent, so you get the slow motion effect. In a nutshell, the R7 can shoot 60 frames a second in 4K. The R5 can shoot not just 60, but 120 frames per second. So in short, the R5 can do slower motion. And why do you need it? Well, the fact of the matter is, for things like sports or animals, or say, for example, you were doing B-roll of a building or a house, or you're filming a car in motion, a higher frame rate is really nice, not just to be able to capture slow motion, but it's capturing information at a higher frame rate, meaning that there's not going to be a lot of like distortion or image detail loss. You're capturing things much faster, and where it really comes in handy, I think, is, let's say you didn't have a gimbal or like a stabilizer for the camera, and you wanted to get B-roll just like, this really smooth motion. Well, if you were shooting at 24 frames a second, it would look choppy. Whereas at 60 frames or 120 frames a second, if you slowed it down, it might be this perfect brief 2 to 3 seconds of like, ooh, yeah, really nice. And that's where I think the benefit comes in. However, what I will say is 60 frames a second is pretty enough, if you ask me. Like, yes, 120 frames would be better, but I think 60 frames a second is more than adequate to capture slow motion, if you will. Like, it's what I've been doing on the 80D for a very long time, and there's a lot of other benefits too. Like, when you think of storage, 120 frames a second, the file sizes just keep growing and growing on your memory card, and for editing as well, it just kind of becomes more cumbersome. Whereas 60 frames a second still suffers from that, but it's not as bad. It's half of the amount of storage required and processing power in editing, and taking up a bunch of storage on your computer's hard drive. So something to consider. I've never been left wanting for 120 frames a second. I don't film enough things that would require super slow-mo. But if I had to award this round to the camera, it's, the R5, obviously, because if you ever needed more slow motion, the R5 could do it. One of the things that I think people tend to overlook, and it's a really important point with these types of cameras, is battery life. Battery life will make or break how you plan a shoot, or when you call it quits because you have no more batteries. Canon makes a phenomenally good battery. The LP6 battery that I bought for the Canon 80D is a really good battery, but the new iteration they made with higher capacity, the LP6-E or the LPE6, is really good. Like, I would say, if even in the R7 or the R5, battery life is going to be comparable. If you're filming at the same frame rate and same conditions, same lens, it's going to be pretty on point. But just know, like Canon batteries, you could in a day filming like consistently all day, you could probably get away with 2 batteries and be fine. They are pretty impressive and that versatile. Like you could throw them into the Edelkrone, for example, to power the slider. In fact, you need to. My point is like if you bought extra batteries, it's nice to be able to use them in different applications, and they're universal. Like the R7 and the R5 use the exact same battery. You can use the LPE6 and the LP6, like the new and the old battery, and the Canon 80D, the old camera, the new cameras. I really like that they kept that consistent. The other thing to take into consideration, and especially if you're filming, again, by yourself, you don't have a camera operator, you don't have someone on the lens and on the crane or whatever the hell, is autofocus. Like Canon autofocus is really, really good. And even on the 80D, it was really good. It has a very good understanding of tracking subjects and knowing when they leave and come back into frame. It understands, you know, the depth of the subject or when it's moving, and it's very, very fast. I was actually kind of overwhelmed with the expansion of autofocus functionality in the R7 and the R5. There's just so many options, and the one thing I'll say is on either camera, just play with it a bit and get used to it, because you might select an autofocus mode that is kind of like too advanced for what you're doing. Like it might be tracking something and you just want to shoot some basic B-roll. It might actually be annoying because it's trying to do more than what you want it to. But all in all, I think, yeah, in terms of having a camera system with autofocus, pair that with the lenses and how good they are. Yeah, like it's so easy to get really nice shots. In terms of which autofocus system is better on the Canon R7 or in the R5, I don't think if you bought either camera, you'd be wondering after the fact, like, I wonder if that other camera had better autofocus. Like Canon's is so rock solid. So how do I bottom line this for you in terms of which camera body to buy? This is a tough one because from a price standpoint, the R7, obviously, you're gonna get terrific image quality. I don't even think you would notice that you're getting sort of a compromise in terms of sensor and the capabilities of the camera in the field using this camera all the time. You'd be more than happy with the R7. But the one thing I'll say based on my experience is that if you commit to buying a camera body to be your steady, the one you always go to, you always grab, I would highly suggest trying to save up or try and find your way to the R5, simply because you'll probably end up using this camera for years to come. I still use the 80D and I've had it for several years, and I've never once regretted, you know, going a little bit extra to try and get a better camera. The R5, I think in a lot of ways will be a good decision for the future. You'll have a larger sensor, full frame, you'll have 8K recording capability, and despite that the R7 does hold its own, in the long run, when you're considering this as an investment, the R5 would be a better camera to buy, because even if you think about resale value, an R5 would be more desirable on the used market than an R7. Now, if you are considering the R5, there's a pretty high likelihood you're going to look at the R6 Mark II because the price is so close, and the R6 Mark II is a newer camera with a lot of updated features. The R6 Mark II does have better autofocusing than the R5. It's just a newer system, and it's going to be a better solution if you think the autofocus on the R5 or even the R7 isn't up to par. But like I've said, you'll be pretty blown away with what it can do anyway. So I don't consider that to be a reason to get the R6 Mark II. The other thing, I think that despite the fact that the R6 Mark II is a newer camera, I think the image quality is still better on the R5, which says a lot considering it's been a few years since the R5 came out. I still think it's a better hybrid camera than the R6 Mark II if you're looking to do photography and videography. So it's up to you. Like I said, even between the R7 and the R5, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with either choice. It really comes down to some very niche applications where it would matter to buy one or the other. So now another camera that you might consider if you're kind of leaning more towards the R7 is the R8, which in fact is a full frame sensor camera, and it's around the same price point as the R7. But here's the issue. It doesn't use the same LP6 or LP6 batteries, and trust me, that's a huge drawback, not being able to use those batteries in that camera. It doesn't have in-body stabilization, which I mentioned is not that big of a compromise, but I think where you're really going to start to notice the cost cutting in the R8 is the fact that it will overheat at around 2 hours or so, which for a full frame camera or a full frame sensor, if you're looking for that, just get the R5. And I know some of you are like, oh, but the R5 overheats like crazy. When it came out, the R5 did have an issue with overheating, shooting sustained 4K video, whether it was at 29.9 frames per second or at 60 frames per second, 120 frames a second. And that's why a lot of people gravitated towards the R5C, because they built in that little fan that could give you continuous shooting. They did a software patch for the R5, and I haven't experienced overheating as being an issue anymore. In fact, filming a lot of this dialogue, I've been filming continuously for probably several hours now, and I haven't run into overheating issues. So again, going back to the point, the R8, while it may be a full frame sensor camera, there are a lot of compromises juxtaposed to the R5. So between the R7 and the R8, I would say go with the R7, because even though it's an APS-C, so a crop sensor, I think with all the features, you're better off going with the R7, because you can still mount full frame camera lenses to it, and it has more functionality than the R8. So the way I would kind of look at this and approach it is, if you're just kind of dipping your toe in the water, set aside like a couple $1,000, buy a used camera body and a used lens and see how you like the process of doing this. You can achieve pretty good results with something on a low budget. That might be a good entry point for you. And rent, try and test out some products that you think you might want to buy and get some hands-on time with them. You may find that, oh, this is really worth it, and I'll spring for the extra money to get this, and you'll enjoy it because you know that it's something you like using. I think if you wanted to do this more seriously, you're probably going to be looking at spending $5,000. And if you want to make your life easier to achieve better cinematography, for sure you'll be spending around $10,000. But if you look at it over time and you try and use your budget wisely, check out sales, try and find used equipment, you can make this work for you. And sometimes the best thing you can possibly do is just get some hands-on time with the products, try and experience what it's like to use them. And I've watched a lot of tech reviews and different influencers go deep and dive into the technology and explain how it all works. And there's a lot of resources in this industry to learn about the products. For me, it wouldn't be much of a product review if I didn't show you what it was like and share my experience in the field. So, enjoy some just footage that I've taken with these different cameras, with these different lenses, and you be the judge. Like, it's really up to you as to what you think looks good. And we're not even going to get into the fact that you're probably watching this on a streaming platform, it's YouTube or whatever. You're not even getting the full quality for the audio and the video anyways. So, use your best judgment, but I can guarantee you that the fear that comes with wanting to buy something like this, it's immediately squashed when you get it. You'll be happy with it and you'll be grateful that you did yourself that favor. But if you can, try and rent it, try and get hands-on with it beforehand, just to double check that the rabbit hole you went down, confirming that this is the right thing actually meets your expectations in person and hands-on. If you can't do that, well, I feel for you, but I still don't think you'll be disappointed. So anyways, before I close it out, again, huge thanks to the video sponsor, McBain Camera. If you're looking to buy the equipment or anything that was covered in here, everything that wasn't covered, they carry a ton of different products, so many different brands for accessories and cameras and lenses, and a great place to deal with. And I highly recommend, even just online, you know, buying from their store. It's a great place to deal with. And thank you again to McBain for giving me all these toys to play with to make this video and sponsoring WhyBuy. So anyways, thank you for watching. And if you thought this video was helpful, please like and subscribe, show your support. And well, I'd say thanks for watching, but I just said that, didn't I?
Yeah.